Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ChrisRodMaxShow, or the AI podcast. It's good to be back this week. We have lots of really interesting topics to discuss. But first of all, hi, Rod, Max. How are you guys?
Hi everyone. We have here always to discuss about our naming, right? So yeah, I think like we are the AI podcast. We should say that more often. We should like mention it, bring it up.
I'm feeling great and good to be back.
Yes, every week we talk either with interesting and very exciting and inspiring startup founders, or we talk about the latest development in the AI world, bringing to you. Today, I brought a couple of topics which I read and found very interesting. So first, we talk a lot about AI and its developments, but we have really not talked about a lot of innovation or maybe even business models springing out of this whole AI trend. And so today, I want to talk a little bit about Cloudflare that's been dabbling into a new business model. I also want to talk about two other industries. So we spoke about legal last time. We spoke about the content creator space quite a bit and extensively. But I want to also talk about the AI space around doctors and diagnostics. So basically what I'm thinking here is like going one step further in telematics, and I want to get your thoughts on that as well. And then third, we got a round of new data around how much actually people and companies use AI within their hiring, firing, and recruiting process. And last but not least, obviously one of the biggest IPO for 2025. I also want to deep dive a little bit into, which is Figma. So with that, let's start with the first topic. So maybe for the audience, Cloudflare is an internet infrastructure player. I'm sure you have come across them where once you access a website, there's this like other website popping up asking you whether or not you're a human being, and then you have to click like a button, and then it continues. So that's Cloudflare. I think that's how people know Cloudflare. And what Cloudflare does is essentially a blocker of bots. And of course, we had this whole conversation on copyright infringement last time, whether or not AI companies are allowed to crawl websites just to like train on the data that they crawl. And so Cloudflare now essentially from July 1st says, okay, by the way, we're just going to block every AI bot that tries to crawl any websites of all the publishers that we host. And they have 20% of global internet traffic, which is actually quite a lot. And I think not only that, so they're blocking everything. And essentially as a publisher, you just have to like give the consent and say, okay, I want to whitelist ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. But I think on top of that, Cloudflare is also testing another business model, which is called pay per crawl, whereby they would actually track AI bots and the publisher would get the control and the transparency on actually who do they allow to crawl, how much do they crawl, and obviously the idea is then to also charge these AI companies some for the crawling and for the training. And I think this is quite an interesting model, and I want to get both of your thoughts on this new model. So maybe I start with Max and then go with Rod.
Great. I think one thing that increasingly I'm seeing because of the advent of AI, there are a lot of like pay per use kind of model that can be applied. And in some ways, this pay per crawl model, it's a way to address that, right? It's almost like taking the best of AI and try to apply that. I also recently heard it, I guess, from Stripe CTO for one of the conference. He mentioned that in the future, like from payments perspective, it's not going to be one human making a huge sum of payment at one go. It's going to be AI agents making a lot of small payments. 2 million times a day, or I don't know, an hour or so. I think this pay-per-crawl model somehow plays to that business model. It somehow, I guess, take the power of AI per se, and then apply it on the source of AI, which is the data. So to a certain extent, I think it comes full circle to on this business model, the ability to deploy it. I think that's the initial thought to come to it, and then around whether or not like I will call it motivation to do this is really around how do we compensate the data providers for what they're providing. Think of it like the folks who write the articles, they want to get compensated for it because those are the data that are created by you, and for it to be in the AI models, I need to be compensated. I think people are just trying to find the right balance on what sort of data one could use. I think it's a little bit of a social question as well as a technological question. I mean, that's how I think about it. I mean, Rod, keen to get your thoughts on this.
Yes, and we underestimate really Cloudflare and what it means because, so Chris, you were saying this is basically this captchas and show that you're a human and so on. But in fact, it's much more than that. So, for example, those who listen us and are not based, let's say, for example, on so in the US, West Coast, East Coast, or even in Europe, they might know how when they want to enter, so they want to go to a website in another geography. Let's say you're in Singapore, Chris, and then you want to check a German website. How often it is that it's like so slow to load, right? Because in the end, information needs to travel across so different geographies. It's like physical exchange of information. And what Cloudflare does is they have a network of servers all around the world and let you basically store your information as a website publisher in their own infrastructure such that it is very close to like your users. So then when you're in Singapore or in San Francisco, you don't know the difference in how fast it loads. And they're already therefore storing large parts of the internet data. And with these, they become these gatekeepers that allow anyone, so it can be organizations or it can be so individuals, to basically monetize their data. And we've been talking so in multiple shows how this is a challenge. We saw all these legal battles. So for example, with OpenAI, that apparently they took copyrighted books from BitTorrent in order to train their models. We'll talk about all these music labels that are taking, so whose copyright is being so taken from some newcomers in the space, in the music space and so on. But then imagine that you have this basically a pay toll. You have a place where before you can access the data, it says, hey, pay, or you don't even get to see the data. And this will enable so many business models, but also provide much more clarity because just this week I was reading that in Denmark, they want to pass basically a law that lets anyone the copyright their face. And the first thing I was thinking is, how will this be enforced? Okay, I go and copyright my face. Then how can I make that OpenAI pays me every time they use my face for their data? And now with Cloudflare, it becomes obvious, right? So I just put my data on Cloudflare, and if OpenAI says to request it, then they have to pay first. So fascinating, and really, we will see that this might have amazing and really impactful changes on how, not just like here AI, but I will say just like the internet business model works.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. And I think the sentiment of very content-heavy creators such as the news space or the content writing copy space are very much in favor for that, right? Like Time, I think was mentioned in this article, was and some other players are very, very much looking forward to getting back control over their content and not being able to know who and who is stealing the data, basically, right? And I also think that obviously with less web traffic, this might also be a good way to compensate these publishers. So from that angle, I think a very interesting and new innovation on the business model front when it comes to dealing with AI and living in the AI era. Great. Moving on to the next topic and next news. So, Microsoft actually built a very complicated, let's say, AI agent or orchestrator. It is called MAI minus DXO, and it stands for Medical AI Diagnostic Orchestrator. Whatever. It's probably some kind of techie that came up with that name. But anyways, I think just to explain the concept, so there was a New England Journal of Medicine article published around that. But essentially, the AI was one, let's say, group to test, and then there was a group of doctors to test with. And the idea was to see whether or not that orchestrator could diagnose, illnesses, disease. If you were to, like, if Max and I, since we were both a little bit ill today, would go to the doctor, whether or not we would receive the right diagnostics. And it's also following this cascading mode of a doctor. So as you guys in the audience remember, if you go to a doctor, they would ask a bunch of questions, right? Like, since when do you have the symptoms, etc. Then you would maybe be ordered to do a blood test, and then based on all the information, the data from the blood test, the doctor would make a final assessment and say, okay, well, Max, you probably have X. Currently. So the orchestrator or the AI does the same thing. And on top of it, it also has almost like a peer group to talk to. So it actually talks to other AI models to test whether or not the data and the interpretation is also the consensus of the group. So very similar to maybe what you would also do as a doctor and asking colleagues if that analysis actually makes sense. And basically, the result of it is quite astonishing. So this orchestrator has been able to achieve 85.5% accuracy when it comes to diagnosing. From, I think before it was only 20%. So that's quite a step up actually already. But then also, I think the other takeaway from this is that it is less costly because the AI makes a more informed decision on whether or not to order a test that obviously costs money. So in the end, it is 85% accurate on the diagnosis, but at a much better price point, basically, or at a lower cost. So I thought that was quite interesting. I think what the article doesn't talk about is actually how it diagnoses, like where's the patient, right? Like I suppose, and this is my hypothesis, is that's a bit of an advanced telematic. So people probably just talk on video or whatnot, and it gets all the information. But I don't know. I thought it was very interesting. What do you guys think about that?
I think this, well, complex diagnosis, right? So let's take, if I were to take one step before that, I mean, we are seeing a lot of online diagnosis today, right? So if you go on any sort of insurance tool, there's some sort of rule-based way of telling you whether or not you have certain problem, and then if you click like a survey question, and then they will tell you, oh, you have this, and next thing, then they will triage and send you to someone to call. I think with the advent of models like this, it will make that process a lot better. Instead of just, I guess, clicking through forms, there's a possibility for you to talk to it. Just like trying to understand what exactly are your problems. I can see the experience of at the moment going from form to having this conversation a lot better. While it's not 100%, 90% when it comes to diagnostic, I think this in itself would have improved the overall customer experience in my opinion. And yes, I am ill, unfortunately.
I was just thinking on, so whenever it's discussion of, will this replace doctors, or do we need them, or what happened now? I reflect on how hard it is in most countries across Europe, US, pretty much everywhere in the Western world, just to get a doctor's appointment, right? So how often you have to wait for months, and yet still also the care is often not the best, right? So you do not feel you're treated right, you also do not feel you get enough attention and so on. And the problem is really we do not have enough specialists. And also very often, so people, they might not have something urgent, but still just want to have a checkup. And tools like that help ameliorate it. So if instead of sending someone here to a human doctor, first the person goes through this as a filter, so to say, and this person first describes any pains or any concerns that they may have, and then you decide, okay, this person really needs to see a human. That, I imagine, that alone could just so help ease this bottleneck that we're having across many countries in not having enough slots for medical appointments. If we will see them soon, I'm not there. I'm sure there, because that's only the case with healthcare in that. Medical tech and so on, it takes forever just to get approvals, right? So maybe like in lab conditions it works well, but then until we see it in our local hospital or GP, who knows? It might be maybe like years away, as often this happens.
GPT, you mean? Sorry. I totally agree with Rod. I think it will take them some time to come to it, but I suspect it's gonna get slid into some of your existing flow. I don't think you will actually replace the doctors. You will still have to see them, but I think these tools will help the doctor to triage really what is, very I would say complex versus what is something that they need to attend to. I have a few doctor friends. I've spoken to them like on different occasions. Like one of their biggest frustration is like they could not do more for more people because every case that they have is just so complex and so much problems. With tools like this, when you free up time for doctors, I think, with very much on other AI tools, is really to help them to focus on things that are most important. I actually think it's a super positive thing. Even from a end user perspective, I think this will vastly improve the customer experience that one would have with medical services provider, to what Rod was saying.
Yeah, definitely. And Rod, you talk about the scarcity of doctors and specialists and having to wait for a long time for an appointment. And I think, Max, that's exactly what you're also talking about, which is the user experience can be improved. And obviously, we talk about very complex cases. Actually, I have to correct myself. So actually, the comparison was actually the AI orchestrator against doctors. So they achieved, or the orchestrator achieved 85.5% accuracy versus 20% of a panel of experienced doctors, which actually makes the case even more interesting. What does that mean? Accuracy, essentially, it means there are a bunch of cases and how often did the AI or the doctors actually diagnose the right diagnosis. So in that case, 85.5% was achieved by the AI and only 20% by the doctors, which I actually find if that was true, that's actually quite sad, to be honest. But I do also agree with you both that at the end of the day, you still need that human element just for trust building. At the very least, in, let's say, the forthcoming years before, the transition of the industry might go another way. But I do also agree, Max, that this is actually, you could also start it as a co-pilot, right? And you would have this like very, very experienced AI doctor that can help to make a more informed decision in a complex case. And it could only benefit patients.
I think I will add to that, right? Like if you look at what happened across the world, junior doctors are suffering from burnouts left, right, and center. I think tools like this could really help. I think provider will use it right, but the tools like this could really help for them to learn in their process as well, right? Like they would do some sort of diagnosis themselves, and then the AI would do a separate diagnosis, but then there's a step-by-step clinical reasoning, and one could always review, if this is right, if that is right. I think it's almost like getting a second opinion, right? When you go to doctors, you don't normally go to one doctor. You try to go to multiple doctors to get multiple opinions. I think with this tool, it could help to improve that. it would be quite funny if all the doctors are using the same tool and telling them all the same thing, then maybe, we're running into the verge trouble after that. But, this is just a thought, because there is still a 15%, 15% of it being wrong, or 14.5%.
But would you guys, or Rod, would you see an AI doctor even with a very beautiful interface, let's say a beautiful lady?
And I got asked a question if, for example, let alone so if we're ready to have surgeries performed by some sort of AI, right? So if we trust that. And on one side we said, oh yeah, that's scary, and I likely to make a mistake or something. But how often we read about so here surgery is gone wrong, so like the doctor forgetting to leave something inside us and they need to take it out and so on. So it happens much more often that in what we know, what we see, right? Because also many of these cases they never make it to the public, and therefore when I think about that, I say, sure, it might not be perfect. So sure, there might be here mistakes. I guess it comes down to just this user experience, in that we can have some sort of like recourse, some sort of like reach out to some human to explain those things and so on, and not just talk to a screen and then there is no way to find out more. But with that, if we are able to basically fix that, then the experience will likely be better, because so here I imagine that we will be, for example, using it from our mobile phones, and then we can save ourselves just a visit to the doctor, and then from our phone from home, just like telemedicine. So we start saying, oh, GPT doctor or whatever we want to call it, I have these pains and so on. Already is happening, in fact. So just how many people are already using ChatGPT to inquire about any type of like medical concerns, about any pain they may have and so on. And this is something where the reliability of information is, let's say, like so we cannot fully trust it, and people are already doing that. So if we have dedicated systems for that, definitely not only that will improve to hear the patient well-being, but also, yeah, so like ease so many problems that we have in the healthcare system. So I'm all in favor.
So, Rod, what I'm hearing, what you're saying is, yes, if the lady diagnoses like flu, you'd be totally up for it. But I'm not. Would you also let an AI robot, whatever, operate on you?
That's well, but even like, for example, so if it will be like something flu is like something minor, or let's say the diagnosis use something terminal, or they require surgery and so on. I think here it's just common sense to go and then grab multiple opinions. It's the same thing. So whenever I know, for example, animation is also business, so there is an incentive, principal agent theory. So where the doctor will tell you, yes, you need this and the most expensive one, right? Often with like dentists or other specialists. And then like the common sense is just check out other practitioners, inquire, and then shop around and decide if that's what you need. Same here with the AI, right? If the AI says you have X, then maybe be a bit doubtful and verify that. And for the surgery, so yes, I guess also like we might not even like notice that. So I guess it happens something where we're already in the so here a hospital, and turns out that is not a human doctor. And I can imagine as well that it will become here like a tier business, just like with insurance, right? That you say, hey, I pay like premium insurance and I get access to here like the senior, so chief doctor at the hospital. And then I have like a lower tier and I get here like more like junior doctor. And maybe like a cheaper tier that is just an AI doctor.
Okay, got it, Rod. So you're not in the premium insurance bracket. No, just kidding. But I think you're bringing up quite interesting points here as well, which is it's all about interfaces. I think, Max, that's also one of your key and core beliefs, that at the end of the day, it's really about how AI is served to human beings, because the examples we heard is, of course, like if there's a medical problem, probably one consultation is on ChatGPT. And it actually, by the way, probably replaces Googling something, right? And consulting the internet and WebMD and whatnot on sort of like the problem here. And then yes, maybe you would even get like one or two recommendations on medicine to like get from the pharmacy in order to like cure yourself. And at the same time, Rod, I think you also mentioning, in a surgery, which is obviously a bit more complicated, do we trust, or I would guess the mass would think, oh, they would rather test or trust a doctor, like a human doctor, rather than an AI. But at the same time, I mean, we all take cars, right? It's also like a machine, like a technology that we trust every single day. So I do believe it takes a bit of that human adoption as well as like the interface on how we serve AI to human beings. That being said, I actually believe at the end of the day, it's really more driven by regulations and responsibilities. And, in case of something, who to blame. I think that's really where I see this sort of like being the factor that determines the rate of the adoption of innovation.
That's what was going through my mind, where I was thinking, for example, if there is some medical malpractice, then so the doctor loses their license, there's maybe some civil lawsuit and you get some compensation and so on, right? But then if you have here an AI doctor who is giving some faulty diagnostic or operating on you, then who is here liable? Is it the hospital, the provider? Is it here Microsoft? I think here is completely uncharted, and we need to figure it out.
I find the liability question really interesting, right? Us as humans, we always need some sort of recourse. It's like when you buy a defunct company, the problem is when you buy a defunct company, there's no recourse. You can't pull everything back. You can't actually take everything back. And therefore, people always say, don't do it. So I'm just trying to think, right? Like from a legal perspective, this is a tool. So should the burden be on the user or should the burden be on the provider? Ultimately, I think it will come down to business model. If it's free for everyone to use, then the burden somehow should be with the user. But then, if you're offering as a service, you're getting paid for it. And contractually, you are liable for delivering the service. And then the liability will probably fall with the service provider. I'm just thinking out loud, right? I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but that's where we see the world has been on like previous services.
But Megs, I think it's kind of the entire discussion we also see on the EV or autonomous driving front, right? Where the question is also when this car gets into an accident, like who to blame? Is it like Waymo and Google at the end of the day, or is it, or who else, right? So I think it's a very similar kind of question you're asking here in the doctor and diagnostic space. Okay, just looking at time, guys, let's move on to the next topic. And this one actually really surprised me. So we got a bit of data from what are they called? They are called Resume Builder. So obviously they wrote this as almost like a copy for probably their own services. But nonetheless, let's say there's a grain of truth in the data. They actually did a survey with about 700 managers in the US. And so this only applies to the US, which I think is very important as a disclaimer. But the question was around, okay, how much do companies use AI in people management? So giving raises, firing people, and hiring people. And the statistics were just mind-blowing, in my opinion. So just to quote a little bit of the stats. So according to that particular survey, 65% of US managers use AI, I suppose, in the people management context. 94%, so almost everyone uses AI in some form or shape to make decisions around their direct reports. And then it goes on to saying, okay, what kind of use cases or where does the AI make or is AI involved? So apparently when it comes to raises, 78% of managers use AI, 77% for promotion. So, roughly 80% in both cases. Layoffs even, there are about 2/3 of managers using decision-making with AI, and then also for terminations. I just want to pause here for a second and just get both of your reactions on that one.
I believe all that. So just these days, I'm sure that there is close to no manager who is not copy pasting or asking ChatGPT to draft an email, to draft anything that is here of relevance. And I've seen it so many times. I've seen this on, I get email sent, this looks very ChatGPT-ish. But also, I see it with legal documents, contract drafts, and so on, where it's very clear this was formulated not by a human, but it was just generated with an AI tool. And I can imagine as well. So, for example, for more radical decisions in a life cycle at a company, right, like terminations, maybe then promotion and so on, where you want to strike the right language, right? So you don't want to be exposed to any type of legal situation, and then therefore you ask, hey, ChatGPT, for example, I need to issue here and maybe a termination letter, and it has to be on legal language. And most of us cannot write in a legal language, right? Like maybe we'll expose ourselves to some discrimination lawsuit or whatever it is, and then this way we can just make sure that won't happen.
Max, do you have any opinion on that?
I'm trying to think. I feel like this is inevitable, but then I also felt like, what's next from here? Are we gonna fire all their HR folks? Right? Because like, what are they doing? Like, if your AI could start helping you to track. So yeah, if you think about HR, if your AI can start helping you to track all your performance of your direct reports, so the managers could have a very good view of what's going on. And then if you're then, I will call it your AI are being coded in policies of what you could do within a large organization, so it will know like how do you rate your folks? Because normally what will happen is rating services is that you as manager, you will rate everyone as great. HR will come back and it's like, dude, you can't do everyone as great. You need to figure out and go with the bell curve. It's like, fine, just do the AI and do that. And then because it has been tracking all the OKRs anyway. And then once you take that, and it's all about hiring and firing decision, but hiring and firing decision, well, it's a lot to do with humans, but there's also a lot to do with like performance being tracked and how people are feeling, yada yada. And that's why in my head I'm thinking like it's almost inevitable that this will happen. I think even in one of the top podcasts, I can't remember which one, they said like, maybe AI could just replace the entire HR function. So there's a little bit of that we're seeing here, right? Like how do you decide when to go? But those are all policies that are coded within it. I also think that I don't know if you guys saw the playbook by Revolut on how they hire folks, how they promote folks. I feel like by having those sort of policies codified, giving it to an AI agent, it probably helps it to be a lot more objective, a lot more, I would say, results driven. And when that comes, there are a lot more less gray lines in between, which means we are able to rely on AI even further. I think it's inevitable. At least that's how I think about it.
And Max, just to give you a stat here also, 43% of HR is replaced or roles are replaced by AI, right? So I think to your point, Rod, sorry.
No, I hear on the right everything that Max is saying, because also, so here, of course, HR people won't like when they hear that, but really, I think that nobody in the company is happy with the HR person. If you're an employee, you feel, oh, the HR is to be there to protect me, but that is always wrong, right? The HR is there just to protect the company. And that's part of like the role, right? Like they need to craft this very specific language or like any type of like promotion, termination, whatever it is, in order to best serve the interests of the company. But now if you have that with an AI, then, and plus you're also doing hiring with AI and so on, what's the role of the HR person? I feel, yes, this is something where likely we might see here a reduction in HR departments, especially because, yeah, they are always seen as cost centers. Always when there is some sort of like right sizing across an organization, first to go out are obviously, so here, marketing, and then commercial, and then of course so here HR and other running functions. And this is like a low-hanging fruit, right? So if you say, hey, suddenly I can reduce my headcount and my overhead, because anyway, hiring, I'm using some AI agent that is reaching out to people on LinkedIn and then just bombing them with messages, which an HR person is, that's what they're doing, right? So they're just copy pasting, replacing your name, and reaching out on LinkedIn. And then the selection process goes the same, right? Like assessment center and so on. All this is done on through an AI program. And then the whole employee lifecycle management can also be controlled through an AI. So what's the place for a human here? I'm not sure. So sure, people tell you, yeah, like it's necessary to have like human contact and so on. But I can imagine that HR departments will be gone at some point, and that point is not that far away.
Mm. Actually, Rod, I think theoretically that might be the case. But actually in practice, I don't think that that's the case, that HR departments will vanish. Especially this is a report from the US, right? But if you were to do anything in the EU, um, like just literally putting any, sensitive personal data into AI models is already like a really, really big red flag. Like you can't basically. So I don't think those stats really apply in an EU, at least in an EU context. I also do believe both of you have described certain specific use cases. When I said those stats on, raises, promotions, layoffs, and termination, of course, there's one very simple use case that probably falls into that stats, which is, okay, let's craft this email to terminate someone. Okay. And I think, Max, for you basically described this case around, gathering data points, past feedback, evaluations, whatnot, and to build a more informed evaluation of the person and the profile. I actually think it goes further than that when I look at the statistics and also this article, because it also says that 21% let AI make final decisions on some of these use cases in HR, which I think is quite frightening. To your point, Rod, on, okay, well, should an AI be better in making these decisions? I think the answer here is really, it depends, right? It depends on how the AI model has been trained. And I think also this article, or there are two articles actually, talk a little bit about some of the biases, right? So biases around age, social, economic, gender, racial profile, etc. And this really depends on how the AI model was trained, on which data sets, as well as like what type of biases it was fed, right? So I thought that was very, very interesting on sort of like the promotion and let's say talent retention part. Now, when it comes to hiring, I actually would also see the point where AI can very much augment and help people make better decisions. And I think we already see this. I mean, I think it's already, 50% of managers are already using AI for hiring. And of course, what you mentioned earlier, Rod, around screening resumes, maybe even having a first initial chat, etc., is already what we see. But then again, I would also bet money on it that for high profiles like C-level, etc., I'm 100% convinced that there will always be a human being involved in the loop to really make the final decision. Because I think one thing, and this is my last point on this, is one thing you can't really, really assess is whether or not this new colleague is someone you like to work with, right? And that's very, very personal. It's very biased. It's very subjective, but somehow it is very important. Otherwise, why do we do hiring with humans in the first place?
But that's just, I hear one of that here is as a counterpoint here to Chris is that that all that is not up to HR to decide, right? Like, so if you look at large organizations, especially, how are promotions or terminations done? They follow some framework, I don't know, like 9 boxes, or they're like whole books with different HR frameworks, and they just apply that. There is no decision, and also the HR person is so removed from like here those in the function. They have no opinion, no nothing, right? They just follow whatever the line manager says, whether it comes out so here from so the department. And for that, you don't need a human. It sounds more like you're saying that there might be geographies where they will say there needs to be a human involved, and therefore there might be some job security. But then this means that I guess HR specialists from the US, they're relocating to Europe because only HR opportunities might be in Europe. So it looks like the job market for HR specialists might get maybe quite rough in the next months and years. And then if there is someone that space listening, maybe that's a good point to come over and then give us a counter opinion and say why their profession will remain vibrant over the next years. But I think that people might need to think so long term what's their place in the job market and how they can thrive there, because it'll become a bloodbath. I can see that.
Yeah, I as both of you were talking about, I'm just trying to figure out, right, what are HR team's core job function? So I went and Google it, right? So everything from recruitment, hiring, training, development, compensation, benefits, performance management, employee relations, compliance, policy. I think some of those will be replaced with AI. I think especially those, like, I would say, low level coordination. But then there will be things specifically that one would need to continue to maintain. I would think things like compliance/policy development. A human will still have to interpret what's out there, turn it into internal policy, and being able to kind of feed it to the AI to let the AI do the job. So while I agree, HR as a whole will probably get a little bit of headwinds, I don't think it will go away entirely, simply because sometimes we still need them for some of the very senior conversations, right? Like when it comes to like headhunting, for example, you can either hire someone to do it outside or you can do it yourself, depending on how often do you need to headhunt, I guess. But I think the overall I would say view on this is it's more bearish than bullish, because bearish in the sense that, you know, AI is going to replace some of the jobs, but I guess that goes with any other jobs really. So yeah.
Max, 2 comments to you, and then we go on to the next topic. It does remind me a little bit of Squid Game, right? I don't know if you guys watch it, but the third season has launched, and right, it's a little bit like, okay, can you somehow avoid being, you know, pushed to the abyss? But yeah, it is quite interesting to see, like, what would you tell your kids what to study, right? It's so hard these days because you don't even know if your job will actually, or that certain job or activity will still be relevant in the next 10 years, right? So I think that's quite interesting. Anyhow, just given time, let's also move to the last topic we have today, which is the Figma 25 IPO. So they filed it in April this year, and it comes in front of the backdrop that, you know, they were supposed to be acquired by Adobe for 20 billion, but that didn't go through. So I think that actually jumpstart them to like really be known in the industry, first of all. But then also they got 1 billion, I think, as a almost like a separation fee or so, which they really deployed into making more and better products. And I think some of their stats are just fascinating, right? Like about 750 million in revenue 24, which is a jump of 48%, which is quite significant. But also just to like take a step back, I think they really came from like a humble sort of like hypothesis back in 2012, which was, okay, well, as a designer, you should be designing together and collaborate with other people. And it should all be entirely done on the internet and not like, you know, in the Adobe Photoshop or whatnot. And then you have to like somehow send the files, the really big files, you know, to one another. So that's really where they come from. And then from there, obviously, they've become this UI or UX company designing or really riding the wave of mobile apps. But then also they expanded very much product-led into other categories. So really covering the entire design cycle, really from, you know, coming up with ideas, whiteboarding, brainstorming, to really launching these different designs. And yeah, I thought it was very fascinating. It really reminded me of almost also like Neuroboard's growth story, because I think one of the reasons why Figma was so successful is because they use word of mouth and obviously, you know, inviting your other design colleagues from the organization to join a certain Figma board. That's really how they were able to grow so fast. But what do you guys think about Figma? Why do you think they have been so successful? When the shares become available, would you buy them? And maybe I start with Max, our finance guy here.
um, no, thank you for that. I think Figma is an interesting one, just anecdotally, right? So I've worked with different designers throughout my career so far, my very short career, but almost everyone talks about Figma. Till today, it's like it's almost impossible to walk away from that. So that's like the designer view. But then the other interesting stats on it is, 2/3 of their users, out of their 13 million monthly active users, are non-designers. And I find that really interesting because you're indirectly opening up the world for folks who are not really from a design background, but really try to build something interesting. As a result, you find a lot of, 90, what they quoted it, right? 95% of Fortune 500 uses Figma, which means a lot of the applications you use today, it's basically designed in Figma. So that to me is super interesting because there is this consolidation for the tool. And I think for tools like Figma, you have to be pretty damn good for people to use you every day. So in overall, just on the usage pattern itself, I'm definitely bullish. But then would also love to see how would that translate in the AI era, right? After all, this is, the AI podcast. I think Dylan, the founder, actually said that there are some, I will call it, AI contenders coming up in this space, but because of their ability to get distribution on where they are today, I feel like they're in a very good spot per se. But Rod, what do you think?
I'll take here the contrarian view, where I think that, of course, I'm very happy for them and I hope that they succeed. Will I buy shares from Figma? I say rather not. And why? If we look at how people use Figma, first is for doing, for example, here mockups or just the user interface for a website. And this was always very hard to do. Let's say like pixel perfect. That a designer, there was always this process. First, you do like in Illustrator or Adobe Photoshop or something, just how it looks in the website. Then you need to like slice it into little like pixels, and then after that, then you'll try to convert it in a way that can be implemented for an actual developer. Right? It was a very long and tedious process. And what Figma allowed was for the designer just to build that and prepare these components that could be then consumed by the developer, therefore saving significant effort and time and so on. But all this is going away with tools like Lovable. So now, for those who do not know Lovable and similar builders, you basically describe what you need. You say, hey, I need like a website that do X and Y and Z, and then it generates it as you want. And then you can iterate through that. You can say, oh, I want this blue. Please change here, this to the left and so on. So like just like talking to ChatGPT, but you're seeing it change live. You have left side the chat, right side you see your website. Therefore, having this use case where you need to have this very precise component design will get smaller and smaller, because also Figma is a very clunky tool in my experience, has always been. It has a learning curve, and it's not really so for like everyone. And then therefore we're saying how like at the top of the market for web development, there is here a thread from Lovable, another tool like Replit, and also V1 from Vercel and so on. Yeah, like these no-code AI builders. Then from the design side, for those who are less like entry level, those who are not professional designers and need, for example, here images for social media, or need, for example, here like a flyer or something, they do not use Figma. They use Canva. Canva is much easier. Sure, it's more basic and so on, but let's say that Canva is for like any mom and pop business. And then also, if you're like a professional designer who is doing like print work, who needs really like this super precision, this is super pixel perfect, then also for print work, Figma is a good tool. So people still resort to Illustrator. So I see from different sides how there are alternatives that are quite good at getting better. So for example, I do not remember when was the last time that I used Figma. It's been like a year since last time I used Figma. Just because for design work, I prefer to use Canva. For web design, I use Lol and others. And I think that now, for example, when I see how teams are using Figma, they're using more as an alternative to Miro, which is this open-ended canvas for collaboration, where you say, hey, let's brainstorm during a phone call, during a Zoom call, and then let's write in this whiteboard our ideas. That's how I see people using it at the moment. So some of them, sure, there are many still doing websites and so on, but I think in the long term, there are too many alternatives. And there's a good reason why in the end Adobe was happy that this didn't go through. I'm sure that they didn't so shed a tear that didn't happen, because they also saw that they were overpaying for a technology that belongs to the past. So Figma was the idea of collaboration, as you were saying, Chris, but they are not an AI native company. And also, I do not see how they can thrive in an AI world.
But again, sorry, just to add to that, I mean, if you follow the S1, which is very well designed, they obviously start off with like the Fig Jam, which is where Rod was talking about. Think of it a little bit like a mirror board, where it allows people to go in and do brainstorming. But I think with the new product development that's coming up on the AI side, I actually felt that they have a good chance of winning because of a distribution. And because they're already in a lot of your larger organizations, because they're already in a lot of the, I will call it think of the larger regulated industries. Humans' behavior are relatively sticky. While I believe all the different AI tools will come and take some share away from them, but I feel like they have the opportunity to, I would say, a small window for them to somehow sustain their competitive advantage. And I think everything Rod mentioned is totally valid. Like today, we're seeing them, as in Figma themselves, trying to release livable like tool from ideation to shipping all in one, and all in that chat interface that we love with Lovable.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for your opinions here, and we shall see what kind of valuation Figma will be able to command, whether or not it's going to be above the 20 billion or below. And I think this very much will be determined by the public markets and how they believe the growth story will continue or not. With that, I'm looking at time. This was a very, very interesting podcast today. We covered a few things. We covered Cloudflare's blocker that is active for AI bots to be blocked on publisher websites. So this gives more control for the publishers and also allows for a new business model potentially on pay per crawl. We also spoke about the medical space and whether or not humans would want to have an AI doctor, or at least, let's say, an AI co-pilot to help with the diagnostics. It seems to be that in this particular experiment with Microsoft's AI orchestrator, that they were able to achieve an 85% accuracy over a 20% one with real human doctors. Then we spoke about the entire HR space and some statistics that we divulge in, which seems to be that 2/3 or almost everyone is using AI within people management decisions, hiring, firing, and promoting. And last but not least, obviously, we also spoke about this Figma case and whether this will continue and what makes them what they are. So with that, thank you guys. Thank you, Rod and Max, for joining in and tuning in today. And for you, the audience, if you like what you hear, if you have any comments, thoughts, or want to get in contact with us, text us. We are on all social media channels. And with that, have a wonderful rest of the week.